CENTCOM released a statement last night that I want you to read carefully before anything else. The exact words were these: U.S. forces completed additional self-defense strikes against multiple targets in Iran. Marine Corps, Air Force, and Navy assets fired precision munitions on Iranian targets that posed a threat to U.S. forces and international commercial ships transiting regional waters. The strikes are in response to Iran's unwarranted and continued aggression. U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and ready. That was the second consecutive night of American strikes on Iran. The USS Michael Murphy fired Tomahawk cruise missiles. Targets included Iranian military surveillance capabilities, communication systems, and air defense sites across Iran. And before those strikes were even completed, Iran's IRGC launched retaliatory missile and drone attacks on U.S. military bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan. 4 sites at the U.S. Al-Azraq base in Jordan were targeted with long-range ballistic missiles, including F-35 fighter jet hangars and a command and control center. Sirens went off in Bahrain. Kuwait announced it was intercepting hostile aerial targets. Jordan said it shot down 5 inbound missiles and that debris fell on Jordanian territory. Oil is above $100 a barrel this morning, and everyone covering this is calling it a new escalation cycle, a dangerous spiral, a breakdown in the ceasefire process. I want to argue it is not a spiral. I want to argue it is a sequence, and the sequence is not random. Every event in the last 72 hours follows a specific logic that has been building since February 28th, and understanding that logic tells you more about where this war goes from here than anything being said in any press briefing today. There are 3 things in this sequence I want you to pay attention to. First, what actually triggered this round of strikes, and what that trigger reveals. Second, what Iran's choice of targets in its retaliation tells you about the strategic decision it made last night. Third, what Trump said on June 10th about taking millions of barrels of Iranian oil every night, a claim he described as announcing for the first time, and what that statement means for every calculation Iran is making right now. When you put those 3 things together, the picture that forms is not a spiral. It is a deliberate reset, and the country that benefits most from that reset is not the one doing the most striking. Start with the trigger. The strikes that CENTCOM launched on June 9th were framed as a response to the downing of a U.S. Army Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. Trump announced this on social media. He said Iran shot it down. CENTCOM confirmed the Apache went down at 7:33 in the evening on June 8th, while patrolling regional waters near the Oman coast. 2 crew members were safely rescued. The cause was listed as under investigation, but Trump called it a shoot-down. And at 5 p.m. on June 9th, at the Commander-in-Chief's direction, CENTCOM launched the first round of strikes targeting Iranian air defense, ground control stations, and surveillance radar sites near the Strait of Hormuz. Now pay attention to the framing CENTCOM used. Self-defense strikes, proportional response, unwarranted and continued aggression. That language is doing something very specific. It is not describing an offensive operation. It is describing a defensive action triggered by Iranian behavior, placing the legal and political weight of initiating this latest round of violence entirely on Tehran. Whether that framing is accurate matters less right now than what it produces. What it produces is a situation where America can resume striking Iran during a technically extended ceasefire and describe every strike as a response to something Iran did first. That matters enormously for what comes next, because Iran's IRGC made the same calculation in reverse. Here is what Iran chose to hit when it retaliated. Not just American ships near Hormuz, not just Iranian adjacent targets. Iran fired on Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain simultaneously. The IRGC claimed 21 significant targets hit across 3 separate countries in a single operation. At Al-Azraq in Jordan, the IRGC said it targeted F-35 hangars and a command and control center. Jordan sits over 1,000 kilometers from the Iranian coast. Hitting it with ballistic missiles, not drones, signals something about Iran's strategic posture that the coverage is underweighting. Iran is not fighting a small war near Hormuz. Iran is fighting a regional war with deliberate geographic expansion. Every time America strikes, Iran's response does not land in the same place America struck. It lands somewhere else, somewhere further, somewhere that involves more countries, more governments, more political complications for Washington. This is Iran's horizontal escalation doctrine. Spread the cost of the war across as many American-aligned governments as possible. Make every country that hosts an American base feel that hosting that base now puts its own infrastructure at risk. Jordan intercepted 5 missiles. Debris landed on Jordanian territory. Kuwait scrambled its air defenses. Bahrain sounded sirens. And these are governments that have been trying to stay as far from this war as possible. Kuwait and Bahrain have been pressing privately for de-escalation since the first week of the conflict. Jordan has been balancing its relationship with Washington against the weight of public opinion inside its own borders. Iran just reminded all 3 of them that the war comes to them regardless of what posture they try to maintain. But here is the piece of this picture that almost nobody covering last night is connecting with the right level of attention. Trump made a statement on June 10th that deserves its own extended analysis. He was at the White House speaking to reporters. On negotiations, he said Iran has taken too long. He warned the US could hit power plants and bridges if Tehran refused to sign a deal. And then he said this. He announced it as if revealing something for the first time. He said the United States has been taking millions of barrels of Iranian oil every night. Millions of barrels. Every night. And he said Iran just figured it out. Read that statement carefully, not as a political boast, as a military and economic fact, if accurate. America has been operating a naval blockade of Iran since April 13th. The stated goal of that blockade was to prevent ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports, costing Iran roughly $500 million per day, according to US estimates. The blockade has intercepted 85 vessels, according to CENTCOM's own count. It has turned ships back, but it has not stopped China's dark fleet. It has not stopped the Iranian crude that continues moving through transponder-off tankers, conducting sea transfers in Malaysian waters, arriving at Chinese refineries labeled as something other than Iranian oil. 157 million barrels of Iranian crude were tracked heading to China at the peak of this conflict. China's customs records showed 0 imports from Iran. The math has never added up because the system was designed not to add up. If Trump's claim is accurate, that America has been physically extracting Iranian oil from somewhere on a nightly basis, the strategic picture changes. It means America has moved beyond blockading Iran's exports and begun directly seizing the resource Iran depends on to fund its resistance. It means every barrel America takes is a barrel that does not reach China's dark fleet. It means the economic oxygen that has kept Iran's IRGC confident enough to block negotiations, reject proposals, and retaliate against 3 countries simultaneously is being directly reduced, not through sanctions that China routes around, but through physical removal. If that is what is happening, it explains something that has been confusing about the last 2 weeks of this war. It explains why the IRGC shot down an Apache helicopter near Hormuz the night before CENTCOM launched its latest strikes. An Apache patrolling regional waters near the Oman coast is not a strategic bomber. It is a surveillance and escort platform, the kind of platform you use when you are conducting extraction operations in international waters and you need eyes on surface activity around you. The IRGC did not shoot down that Apache because it was threatening Iranian air defenses. It shot it down because something was happening in the water near it that the IRGC wanted to stop. That is speculative, but Trump's own announcement makes it less speculative and more operational. And the IRGC's decision to immediately retaliate, not at the site of American activity near Hormuz, but at Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain, tells you the IRGC understood exactly what signal needed to be sent. Do not make this just about the Strait. Make it about every country in the region. Make the political cost of cooperating with America as high as the military cost of resisting Iran. Here is the framework that makes the sequence visible. I call it the pressure and spread model. America applies pressure at one point. Iran spreads the consequences across as many points as possible. America applies pressure at Hormuz. Iran spreads consequence to Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain. The logic behind the spread is not military, it is political. Iran cannot defeat 3 American carrier strike groups in a direct engagement. Iran's air force has been largely destroyed. Its naval surface fleet has been degraded. What Iran has retained is a long-range missile force, a drone inventory, and an understanding of how Western political systems respond to geographic expansion of conflict. When 5 Iranian ballistic missiles head toward a Jordanian airbase targeting F-35 infrastructure, every American ally in the region runs a new calculation. The calculation is no longer about whether American forces can protect them. American forces are doing the protecting. The calculation is about whether being protected by America means becoming a permanent target of Iran. And that calculation produces political pressure on Washington that the IRGC does not have to lobby for directly. Jordan makes the argument, Kuwait makes the argument, Bahrain makes the argument, Saudi Arabia makes the argument every time its oil infrastructure appears on a published target list. The IRGC fires the missiles. American allies deliver the political consequences to Washington's desk. Now let me address the argument that this sequence actually favors America, because that argument has real weight, and I want you to test it. America's argument is that the resumption of strikes is not a breakdown of the ceasefire. It is the pressure mechanism working as designed. Trump extended the ceasefire with no deadline, specifically to give Iran time to negotiate, but he made clear the blockade stays in place and strikes resume whenever Iran's behavior requires it. The Apache shootdown gave CENTCOM an immediate justification to strike Iranian surveillance and radar infrastructure near Hormuz. Degrading that infrastructure makes Iran's ability to monitor and contest commercial shipping through the strait weaker, not stronger. Every surveillance radar site destroyed is one fewer set of eyes Iran has on Hormuz. And Trump's warning that power plants and bridges are next is not bluster. It is a statement about where the next phase of pressure leads if Iran does not sign. On the retaliatory strikes against Jordan and the Gulf, the argument is that Iran hit 3 countries, and most of the missiles were intercepted. Jordan reported no casualties, only debris. Bahrain and Kuwait activated defenses. If CENTCOM's strike package successfully degraded Iran's radar and surveillance network near Hormuz, while Iran's retaliatory strike package was largely intercepted, that is, an exchange where America came out ahead militarily, and one where Iran's attempt to spread regional pressure produced condemnations from Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, and Egypt, rather than pressure on Washington to stand down. All of that is coherent. The military exchange arguably favored American assets. Interception rates were high. CENTCOM's stated objectives were surveillance and air defense degradation, achievable goals. But here is what the steelman cannot account for. Trump, on the same day the strikes were running, said he was close to authorizing strikes on Iranian power plants and bridges. And Qatari negotiators flew to Tehran that same day. Those two facts happening simultaneously tell you the negotiation track has not collapsed, but that America is threatening to make any future deal impossible to reach by destroying civilian infrastructure that would take years to rebuild, regardless of what Iran's diplomatic faction is willing to offer. Striking power plants does not produce a faster surrender from a country that has already absorbed 100 days of military pressure. It produces a humanitarian crisis that makes international support for any deal politically harder to sustain and gives Iran's IRGC the domestic narrative it needs to block the civilian government from accepting any terms at all. The sequence I want you to hold in your mind is the one that happened in a single 24-hour window on June 9th and 10th. An Apache helicopter goes down near Hormuz at 7:33 in the evening. CENTCOM launches self-defense strikes on Iran by 5 p.m. the next day, targeting surveillance capabilities and air defense near the strait. Iran retaliates against bases in Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain with ballistic missiles and drones targeting F-35 infrastructure and command centers. Trump announces America has been taking Iranian oil nightly and Iran just figured it out. Qatari negotiators fly to Tehran. Investors begin pricing in a long war. That is not an escalation spiral. That is a war that has found its operating rhythm. Strike, retaliate, spread, negotiate in parallel, repeat. And the country that has built its entire strategy around surviving exactly this rhythm, the country that spent a decade constructing payment architecture, a dark fleet, a strategic reserve, and satellite networks precisely so that Iran could endure this kind of sustained pressure without its economy collapsing, has not changed its position by a single statement in the last 48 hours. Watch 3 things as this day runs. The first is whether CENTCOM confirms or denies Trump's claim about nightly oil extraction from Iran. If there is a CENTCOM statement or a Defense Department briefing that provides any operational detail about what America is doing with Iranian oil in the water near Hormuz, that confirms the activity is real and tells you the war has entered a resource seizure phase that is categorically different from anything that has happened before. If CENTCOM stays silent about the nightly oil claim and only discusses the strikes on surveillance infrastructure, the statement was positioning ahead of negotiation, not operational fact. The second is whether Jordan issues a formal diplomatic protest to Tehran following last night's missile strikes, or whether Jordan contacts Washington to ask for different terms of engagement that reduce its exposure as a base country. Jordan intercepting missiles heading toward its airbase is Jordan doing exactly what an American ally is supposed to do. But Jordan has a domestic political environment, a Palestinian population, and a king who has spent years managing the tension between American alignment and regional credibility. If Jordan's response to last night goes beyond a condemnation statement and includes any diplomatic outreach toward Arab League mediation, or any signal about the terms under which American forces operate from Jordanian territory, that is Iran's spread doctrine producing exactly the political consequence the IRGC designed it to produce. The third is what Qatari negotiators brought back from Tehran. Qatar flew negotiators to Tehran on June 10th while strikes were running. That fact alone is the most important diplomatic development of the last 24 hours. A country conducting active airstrikes against Iran simultaneously received Qatari mediators in Tehran. That means Iran's civilian diplomatic channel is still open, even as the IRGC fires ballistic missiles at Jordan. The question is not whether a deal is theoretically possible. The question is whether the Qatari channel produced anything from Tehran that bridges the gap that has stopped every previous round. Watch for any Qatari Foreign Ministry statement in the next 48 hours. Its content will tell you whether last night's exchange of fire reset the negotiating floor, or simply confirmed that both sides have agreed to fight and talk at the same time until one side's calculation about cost changes. The ceasefire as a formal structure is gone. What remains is something more complicated, and in some ways, more dangerous. Two governments striking each other's military infrastructure while mediators carry proposals between capitals. A war with no front line and no agreed rules about what counts as escalation beyond what each side is willing to absorb before striking back. Iran just demonstrated it will fire long-range ballistic missiles at an airbase in Jordan after a US strike near Hormuz. America just demonstrated it will strike Iran on consecutive nights after an Apache goes down. And somewhere in that exchange, a Qatari diplomat boarded a plane to Tehran with a proposal that nobody has published yet. That proposal, whatever it contains, is what this sequence was actually about. Not the Apache, not the radar sites, not the F-35 hangars in Jordan. The question underneath all of it is whether the pressure America is applying through strikes, blockade, and apparently nightly oil extraction has moved Iran's private negotiating position closer to something signable, or whether the IRGC's decision to answer 2 nights of American strikes by targeting 3 separate countries simultaneously is the IRGC telling its own civilian government, as clearly as a ballistic missile can say anything, that the terms of any deal still have to go through them first.